Welcome back to the Morning Show here on Arise News. President Muhammadu Buhari's state visit to South Africa has been evoking all manners of emotions back here in Nigeria. But quite predominant have been the positions of many stakeholders that this visit should not be happening now. Barely 1 month after hundreds of Nigerians practically escaped from South Africa courtesy of an indigenous airline in the wake of the most recent wave of xenophobic attacks on foreigners in that country. We will be discussing this with Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, a diaspora and strategic communication scholar, senior lecturer in mass communication at Base University, Abuja. Dr. Adeniyi will also be giving us his thoughts on a number of developments in the Nigerian polity at this time. Dr. Adeniyi, welcome to the Morning Show.
Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on, Doc. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you. Well, I mean, in the introduction, I talked about President Buhari's reciprocal visit to South Africa. But some Nigerians are saying, well, maybe the visit should have been cancelled, should have been postponed, considering what happened in South Africa recently with all those attacks on Nigerians and other foreigners in South Africa. Do you think that this is the right thing to say? We should have turned our back on South Africa, or is good diplomacy for President Buhari to proceed with the reciprocal visit, which had been scheduled really since the 2016 visit of President Cyril Ramaphosa to Nigeria?
Yeah, very well, Doc, and your very competent team. My pleasure to be here again. But I think, first of all, the visit is in order. In diplomatic engagements, in foreign relations, really, there are three basic instruments that we often deploy. One is military force, the other one is aid, and the third one is the one we've talked about, which is diplomatic processes, or diplomaties, as the case may be. We do not have the kind of aid that we can use to intimidate, blackmail, or badger down South Africa. Neither do we have the military force. And even if we have it, it might not be necessary. It's always the last resort. So what is in our hands, the instrument we have is diplomacy. And in diplomacy, you do not talk about somebody being weak or somebody lacking a sense of understanding. Diplomacy is about maturity. It's about the use of wisdom to the management of processes and procedure. Xenophobic attack is an extreme reaction. It's like racial attack as well. But when it happens, we all ordinarily should know that it's coming out of the absence of understanding on the part of the perpetrators. It's coming out of some levels of illiteracy and what Olarotimi once called the genocidal of oppression, and what Amilcar Cabral, one of the greatest thinkers in Africa, also called the psychology of disenchantment coming from the declassy element. Okay, so if these declassy elements, if the oppressed, are fighting themselves in the way the low-income earners in South Africa were fighting the Nigerian strugglers over there. Leaders, statesmen should not sound similarly. Ways should be found to deal with it, and that's what I think the Nigerian and South African states are doing. We need all kinds of rapprochement. We need diplomacy at the highest level. We do not all have to sleep and put our heads and legs on the same side of the bed. Difference is beautiful. The fact that our leaders are trying to be different from what the attackers are doing is salutary. And I think that's what we need. Do not forget that South Africa and Nigeria belong to the same horizontal plane in international politics. Our phenotype is also similar. Our histories are not also too different. And of course, in terms of our economy are the largest on the African continent. We have a lot to gain together. So if anything is done on the part of the states, to cement our relationship, I think it should be commended. Painful as the xenophobic attack is, it is very painful, very regrettable. We hope that it's not going to continue anyway. But what we should be doing really is to see how we can build our relationship and not try to go into further diplomatic crisis, like maybe a boycott of the visit will have resulted into, Doctor.
But you mentioned differences. Should there be stark differences between leadership and the people that they are leading? We had a repatriation about a month ago. We had rousing renditions of the Nigerian anthem, and there was a real upswing in national pride, patriotism. And you now have this, the optics of our president going to South Africa with our national flag hung askew. Now, we have had some progress with this visit. There have been 32 trade agreements that were signed. But my question for you is the timing and the venue of the signing of these agreements. The suggestion is not to burn bridges with South Africa, but could the visit have been conducted here?
Well, again, back to what we are saying, we may not necessarily be teleological to do in the analysis of these processes, you know. If we want to say this one should happen before this other one happen, you know, if we want to say, no, it should have been this, it should have been that, it should have been that, then we might be wasting a lot of time in the management of a snowballing crisis. You know, the crisis had started and it could snowball. You know, it was a major crisis of confidence that was building. You know, what leaders should do in that circumstance is to try and nip it in the bud. I watched this Nigerian. I watched it live on your network yesterday when the way the flag was hoisted. Yes, very painful, but I wouldn't say that it was deliberate. It could just be somebody somewhere not doing what he's supposed to do correctly. And those things I don't think should be magnified to a level where we begin to interpret it, you know, to judge, you know, whether or not they are contemptuous of us, or whether or not we should have reacted this way or that way. You know, things happen. You know, there will be incidences, there will be misunderstanding. But when it comes, you know, statesmen are built with the way they manage crises that snowball in the process of statecraft. You know, and for the two leaders to have thought about coming together at this stage after a high-power delegation had come to Nigeria. For a leader, for instance, to have decided to go to South Africa, I don't think it's anything out of the world. But what will happen, what matters from now on is what happens from now on, really. You know, are we going to continue to see this kind of attack, or will the visit bring it to a stop? Or will the South African government be much more responsive to dealing with the culprits? Will there be consequences for those kind of action in the future, like we haven't been saying? You know, what will the South African government do to their foreign affairs minister who hasn't been communicating well, whose languages have been very, very demeaning and contemptuous of the Nigerian state? You know, what action will the South African government be taking, you know, to make sure that we do not see any further attack against their African brothers? Those are the things that I think should matter after this visit. But for us to continue to question the veracity of the need for the visit, really, well, everybody's entitled to his or her opinion, but I think that it may not be the best way forward in the spirit of Africanness.
On a more realistic note, though, Dr. Adeniyi, do you really think that these are attacks that, through the diplomacy methods that we've used, are really and truly going to stop? Xenophobic attacks have been going on in South Africa since 1994. We've had several waves of these attacks going on. And even after this last wave that took such a strong stance across Africa, they still had their Minister of Foreign Affairs coming out and basically still insulting Nigerians for not who we are, essentially. Then we have our presidents going against the wishes and the willpower of the people. And that sends a particular message. So my question to you is, when do we say enough is enough to diplomacy? They had an envoy come over here. We sent an envoy over. Surely it should have started and ended there. When do we say enough is enough? Or do you really think that this visit is going to bring an end to the xenophobic attacks that have been going on for over 20 years against Nigerians predominantly?
Yeah, Leila, your question is very, very valid indeed, you know, but it's always very difficult to find an end, to say that at this point in time, diplomacy should end. Diplomacy is a continuous process. You saw what happened between Iran and the United Kingdom. recently over that strait, you know, where a British concern was seized, you know. In terms of military prowess, for instance, you cannot compare Iran with the almighty Great Britain. But what did they do? Diplomacy. You can see the tension between North Korea and the United States of America. What are they still doing? Diplomacy. You know, irrespective of the might of the United States of America. You know, a country that can afford to obliterate a North Korea, for instance, God forbid, if some of that kind of things that we don't expect happen. You know, so there cannot be an end to diplomacy, really. And between a country like Nigeria and South Africa, where Bolaji Akinyemi would rather want to put us, class us as members of the concert of medium powers. You know, we belong to the same horizontal level, like I said earlier.
Adeniyi,
you know, how much more?
Interject here. Dr. Adeniyi, if I may interject here, those examples are not exactly on all fours with this situation because U.S. interests and U.S. citizens were not attacked in those countries. When they were in fact attacked, when the American soldier was killed in Afghanistan by the Taliban, America immediately ceased peace talks with the Taliban. So I do have to make that distinction there. It's a completely different ballgame when your nationals are attacked.
Yeah, very, very. Why I think they are similar is when you look at the military might of those countries in comparative terms. We're talking about what else are we going to do if not diplomacy? You know, I said earlier that there are three major tools: military force, aid, or diplomacy. You know, military force, we cannot deploy it. Aid, we don't have the means. So the option left for us is diplomacy, and there's hardly an end to it. That's the point I'm trying to make, Tutu. You know, and America will, most of the time, you know, are not quick to deploy military force. You know, irrespective of their progress at the level of gumbo diplomacy, irrespective of their military might. They are not quick at deploying it.
It's not an end to diplomacy than a leap to using military force. For example, when Black Hawk Down happened in Somalia, America shut down the embassy in Somalia for 30 years. So that's it. It's not about deploying military force. We don't exactly want to bomb South Africa, but it's just the optics of our president going there rather than having them come here. But at this point, we'll take a short break. Dr. Abiodun, please stay with us.
Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. Still with us in our Abuja studio is Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, a senior lecturer in mass communication at Base University. Dr. Adeniyi, I have one more question for you on the South African visit by President Buhari. At the joint press conference that the two leaders had yesterday, one issue that came out was the issue of trade between the two countries and the relationship between Nigerians and South Africans. And the papers have quoted President Buhari saying that, look, when Nigerians are in South Africa, they should try to do what the South Africans want, because when you are in Rome, you do like the Romans. And President Buhari was quoted as saying that, look, if South Africans don't want you to do a small and medium-scale, businesses where they are more engaged at the ordinary man's level, then don't do it. Don't disturb them. Look for another area of business. And then, of course, you have President Ramaphosa quoted as saying that Nigeria and South Africa will address the challenge of trade imbalance. That, look, in Nigeria here, we have big South African businesses, big ones, banks, consumer goods chains and all that. The Nigerians are doing petty trading in South Africa. What do you think that Nigeria should do to address this so that we can have big businesses in Nigeria owned by Nigerians or Nigerian corporations also playing big in the South African economy? And I think that's important because oftentimes we have these meetings, we have these joint presidential briefings, and then there is no follow-up.
Yeah, very well, Doc. But before I respond to your question, let me just go back to the exchange I was having with Tudu. I think I was just trying to express my own opinion, and I'm very convinced about what I was saying, that diplomacy is an endless process, and it's what we need between two of the biggest and the strongest African countries at the moment. That's my point, really, and I'm happy to stand on that
point
ground.
Is clear. It's not about who wins the argument. Sir. Yes, please. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, very well. And on your question, really, we are in a decentered world. We are in an increasingly globalized economy, and the integration is endless, you know. And we have to give all thanks to the power of communication, which is revolutionizing everything, you know. Between South Africa and Nigeria, we cannot overstate the point that we're these two biggest economies in Africa, even if the content in one is stronger than the other, you know. So trade, integration, investment, collaboration will continue to be very, very important, really. And the imbalance between us and South Africa is not really our fault. You know, international politics is a reflection of domestic politics, and it's also a reflection of domestic economy. Our economy may be largest, but in terms of content and depth and quality, South Africa is still higher. So if they are exporting capital the way they are doing, we understand it. It is because of what they are inheriting partly from apartheid, and they're going to continue for some time. You know, but what Nigeria need to do is for us to grow our economy internally first. If we do not grow it internally, how are we able to export capital? So the imbalance may continue. Forget about the rhetorics that we had in South Africa, but perhaps it's a reminder of the need of the work that we still need to be, that we still have to do. And I think it's a challenge to us too to grow our economy, you know, as with all the energy at our disposal. So I think it's in order for us to be very optimistic that the future is better than what we presently have, Doctor.
Okay, Dr. Adeniyi, let's move on to another topical issue right now. We recently got told through the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing that tollgates are supposed to be coming back. And of course, people have mixed feelings about this simply because of the reasons why tolling was taken away, and also because many citizens believe that we are already paying out of pocket for our road use and we are not seeing any results. I would like to get your take on this matter at hand. How do you feel towards the reintroduction of toll gates across our major highways? Do you think that this is a good step, a step in the right direction, or do you think that we are just going back to the days of corruption and filled pockets that should not be?
Yeah, Leila, I think we need more explanation on why government thinks that the toll gates have to come back. Because I remember personnel in this administration has been making the round in the social media at some point in time in the past. You know, they campaign against it, they criticize the attempt by some past government, perhaps the Jonathan or the Yar'Adua government, to reintroduce toll gates, you know. They kicked against it, so if the same government is the one saying that it should come back now, perhaps they need to give us some more explanation. Otherwise, it's probably a wrong way to go in the circumstance. You know, yes, we know that policies and policy directions are not cast in stone. They are subject to reviews. You know, systems are dynamic, you know, and you have to think not just perhaps out of the box, but without the box, like Professor Soludo recently said. You know, it's a continuous process. It's okay for them to review it if the real reason is rightly explained to us. But for now, we are still in the dark. And if it's not justifiable, I don't see any reason why it should be reintroduced. I understand that it could be further to revenue drive, you know, but you are talking about increasing VAT, bringing back toll gates. Don't forget that the same people that will bear the brunt are the people that you are out to serve. You know, how much brunt do you want them to bear in trying to generate revenue for development? You know, the people are already overtaxed, the people are already overstressed, and the roads are not necessarily good, and you want to toll it again. You know, so these things have to be properly thought through, and I think we need some more explanation, really. Otherwise, government should leave the situation a priority. Leila.
According to Babajide Fasha, that Minister for Works, the rationale is road maintenance, and that the revenue generated from these toll gates will serve that purpose. What are your thoughts on that? PDP has asked for that decision to be rescinded, but from his statement, from the minister's statement, it's really all systems go. He has said it's all been designed, everything, it's a done deal at this point, that the only thing they're trying to figure out is the back-end operations. So if it really is a done deal at this point, what are your thoughts on how the back-end operations should work such that corruption is minimized and that money really does serve the purpose of road maintenance?
Yeah, Tutu. I think I sympathize with Fashola really, because I heard him in the National Assembly sometimes saying that the ministry is owing about 300, nearly 400 billion to local contractors alone. You know, and what they have in the budget to pay them is just less than 200 billion. So I want to sympathize with him, because ordinarily you will see him as somebody who is conscientious, somebody who is hardworking, and who is determined to deliver on the assignment he has been given. But at the same time, we have to marry that with the expectations of the people and with the pain that the people are already going through. Yes, there could be. Well, again, we hear stories about us trying to borrow money, to attend to some of these needs. But so what is the balance really? How much are we borrowing to deal with these problems? And why is it that the amount of money that we are borrowing, the money we are looking for from other sources to deal with these problems, are we saying that they're no longer enough, such that we want to think about tolling so that we can generate more revenue? And at the end of the day, have we been able to deal with the problems of corruption that is actually bedeviling us as a nation? Because we know that in the past couple of years, we've been told that we borrowed a lot of money, but quite a number of skeptics, quite a number of critics, people are apprehensive that these monies have not been properly channeled, because I've had people saying that, okay, you borrow so much, what did you do with it in the first instance? There's nothing on ground. Well, this might be extreme reactions, but again, we need further explanation from government so that we know that there's justification for this loan, for these debts we are going into. And again, you need to prove to us that you do not have any funds, no more funds is coming from other sources. So the only option left for you is to introduce Tollgates so that you could generate revenue. Because if you are introducing Tollgate, where is the money coming from? Coming from the citizens. And where are the citizens they are going to get their money from the economy. But do not forget that the economy is already weak. It's the same economy where we lack infrastructures and utilities for them to thrive, for them to do businesses. So where will the money come from at the end of the day? From people, citizens who are expectant, who are living off a weak economy, and you are tolling them again. So it could just be double jeopardy or double wahala, like fella Nick Polaku will want to say too. So government will need to think through these things properly, so that we will see at the end of the day that they are concerned about our aims and aspirations and about our well-being overall.
Well, Dr. Adeniyi will go on a break shortly, but before we do so, I'd like to ask you what you think about this recent reference to a third-term agenda campaign. I mean, we went through that in the past. Although the presidency has shut it down to say that President Buhari is a Democrat, he remains a Democrat, and he will not do anything to violate the Constitution. But then you still have this small, group of Nigerians who are saying, well, there is no fire without smoke, and that, there must be something behind it for anybody to be talking about third-term agenda. I would like you to comment on this and to tell us whether you believe the reassurance that has been given by the presidency. We'll take a short break now. After the break, we'll come back to you. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. Still with us in our Abuja studio is Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, who is a senior lecturer in mass communication at Bayes University. And together with him, we've been looking at quite a number of topical issues. Dr. Adeniyi, before we went on break, we had raised a question about third term. Again, in Nigeria, after we said many years back, never again.
Yeah, I think as a communications student, as a journalist, like you all also are, I rather want to undermine or to play down the fact of speculation. I know how dangerous speculation can be, irrespective of the common saying that there's no smoke without fire. It's better to just leave these things at the realm of hypotheses, at the realm of constructions of these sycophants. So I want to be satisfied with the explanation that the government gave, that there's nothing like that. And if you look at the body language of the president, well, body language may not be mathematical, but if you look at the body language, you ordinarily want to say that he's probably not one person that will go for that kind of alternative, that will choose that route, because it can actually be very dangerous. We witnessed it in the past, and we saw how it ended. I don't think any rational leader will want to toe that path anymore. So at the moment, I'll just see it as the byproduct of sycophants who are trying to please or overplease the principal. And it's just going to be full of sound and fury, and it's not going to signify anything at the end of the day, due regards to William Shakespeare.
We do hope it doesn't signify anything at the end of the day. Another topical issue right now, Doctor, is the Economic Advisory Council that the president put together about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, and they're set to have their inaugural meeting, if I'm correct, over the weekend, before meeting with the president next Tuesday. What can we expect to come out of this sort of inaugural meeting? And also, what kind of weight can we expect this Economic Advisory Council to also hold?
Yeah, Leila, we know very well that, like we have had many analysts say, that the council is people with people who are very professional, people who are very experienced in economic matters, and we cannot doubt their expertise, really. You know, they are grounded people as economic thinkers and as economists, you know. So the president did well through that constitution. But it is one thing to have a very powerful team, and it's another thing for you to take the advice of that team. And I listened to Professor Soludo at the platform a few days ago, and he jokingly said that he was once an advisor, and he remembered his principal saying that, you know, you are an advisor, feel free to advise me, you know, but I'm not obliged to taking your advice. If you want me to take your advice, the fact that I don't take your advice does not mean you should stop advising me. Your role is to advise. Just continue to advise. Perhaps he was just making alluding to the fact that, yes, they are advisors, yes, they are competent, yes, they are well chosen, you know, but it's not all that is, you know, to getting their views implemented, to getting their opinions executed. You know, there's a principal out there who may choose to take or not to take. You know, but the first thing first, you know, we should be happy, we should be gratified that we'll have a solid team. You know, the other thing should be for us to wish them well and hope that their advice, their counsel will be taken. But let's not also forget that economic variables are never cast in stone. Economic variables are always shifting. There's the question of ceteris paribus, all things being equal. Even if the advice, even if the government implement, what about variables that you cannot foresee? What about variables that are unpredictable? They will still have to come into play. You know, what we need to be doing, well, expectations should just be that all the variables will remain constant. The advice will come, and very well too, and the president will take it, and all the variables will remain constant, and if properly implemented, of course, it will result into growth and development, prosperity and happiness for the nation, Nigeria. Leila.
Dr. Adeniyi, let's talk border closure. The border between Nigeria and Benin Republic was closed, which we all know, and the presidency is feeling quite proud of the economic benefits, according to them. Do you agree that it has paid sufficient economic benefits to justify that closure? And also, what are your thoughts on the fact that the Senate has increased customs revenue target for 2020 by about 557 billion naira, possibly buoyed by this success that is being claimed at the border? How is that going to impact your average Nigerian?
Yes, Tudu. You know, I think we once discussed this, and we came to the conclusion that, okay, we agree that, you know, actions like closing border, you know, are probably geared towards protectionism, you know. But again, there's a sense in which we can say that when borders are closed, it borders on the extreme, you know. It lands on the extreme. It seems to be an extreme reaction to a malaise or to infractions on import-export policy. What I think government should rather have done is to find ways of dealing with him on a minuscule, minute-by-minute basis, instead of taking the extreme measure of closing borders. Because how long are you going to continue to resort to this kind of extreme actions? You know, it's not something that is sustainable, and it's not something that should last for too long, because there are so many things that we are missing that we are not going to know until after a while. And I would rather, very honestly, and with every due respect to heads of the agencies, I would rather that, you know, our border between Benin is not more troubling like the one between Cameroon, like our border between Cameroon and the Lake Chad region. I would rather that they close those ones as against this one that they are closing. You know, government should quickly deal with it. I heard, again, the Comptroller General of Customs saying yesterday that, you know, smuggling has been reduced, that, you know, bandits who are coming into Nigeria, with arms through those borders have been checkmated and banditry has reduced. I don't know how he measured the statistics. I don't know how that statistics came about. If that is true, well, that is good. But overall, it's not something that is sustainable, and it's not something that we should continue to resort to, because it seems like an extreme measure which we cannot continue with as a nation. And back to your second question, it's okay as well for Senate to make projections. What more do we need other than more revenue in everything we are doing? More money will also help, but again, it's important to also make the point that you cannot have enough money. What have we done with the little that we have? Are we managing it well? Before we begin to think of more money. Senate projection is right. Senate projection is optimistic, it's reasonable, it's commendable. But again, we need to think back. We need to reflect and reflect, how have we managed the one we had before we start thinking of further projections to do.
Dr. Adeniyi, we would like to have your comments on the back and forth over the implementation of the new national minimum wage since April, when it was signed into law. And the disagreement is over the formula for consequential adjustment, with Labour saying, look, government must respect the law and pay, and these are their terms of how to adjust the salary scale. And then you have, on the other hand, the Minister of Labour complaining about government's ability to pay, more or less saying government will be unable to pay because what Labour is asking for amounts to about 580 billion. Meanwhile, Labour is saying if government does not pay, by October 16, it will call out its members to down tools. What do you think? Should we still be talking about consequential adjustment virtually 6 months after that bill was signed into law by President Buhari?
Very well, Doc. When you were asking me that question, I just remembered you as somebody who has written virtually on every subject matter in this country. There's actually every subject matter. There's actually any subject matter that you have not written or spoken about in your career as a journalist. And it reminds me of what Fela Anikulapo said as well about if I sing, you say, water, I know day, now old news will be that. And again, it will also take us to what Paul Gilroy, British writer, said about the changing scene. That delicate oxymoron. Every time we seem to make progress, we are coming back. If we take 2 steps forward, we take another one backward. Apologies to Patu Tommy as well. What this all point to is that, we have been on the same issue for a very long time, and we are having problem with resolving them. The people on the Labour side are Nigerians. Government officials are also Nigerians. What is the problem? Why can't we come to an understanding? And I remember at a time, Bismarck, the economist, was, if I'm not wrong, really, was asked to head one committee to find ways of resolving this logjam. So what is the problem that we cannot come to a common understanding? I think there might be an issue with a sense of nationalism, a sense of patriotism. Otherwise, or perhaps the way we doubt our commonness, the way we doubt our leaders, or the way the leaders are less committed to meeting our yearnings and aspirations. I think something is missing in the mix, and I think by the time we get what is missing in the mix, we can resolve this matter, Doctor.
I think what you just said about our leaders being committed to actually following through with our aspirations is definitely the problem here, Doctor, because let's take a situation that just happened overnight, a fresh situation in Kaduna State where 6 students, female students namely, and 2 teachers were abducted by kidnappers overnight. This takes us back to situations we've looked at with our school children getting taken away and abducted from their classrooms, particularly females. And it brings up the question of how seriously this administration is taking matters of security for us. I say this because recently as well, the police trust fund is also now a topical issue. People as stakeholders are calling on the president to really and truly put this board together and get things acting. Yet we have situations where students are being kidnapped overnight. How seriously do you think this administration is really taking matters of security on behalf of the citizens? Or is it back to what you just said about our leaders just not really following through with the aspirations for this country?
Very well. The security question is actually very concerning. And the fact that it's still raging after all these efforts is really very unfortunate. You know, people are scared of traveling, moving out of their locations, you know, because you don't know what will happen to you. You can get kidnapped, you can get killed, you know, all such things. So you just live practically in fear. You know, even Abuja is no longer safe, like you all know, you know. So if Abuja is not safe, where else will be saved? Where will you say you are free, that you can actually sleep with your two eyes closed? But at the same time, we need to sympathize with the security agencies. You know, it is okay to say that they are doing their best. You know, because what is the ratio, the police-citizen ratio in this country? What is the police security agency ratio in our country? Then how much more funds do we have to give them to buy equipment? We know that, you know, they could do better with the little they have, but they are failing. You know, and what we can continue to do in the circumstances is just to charge them to be much more responsive. You know, Kaduna Abuja Road used to be a fine place to travel on, but it's like a suicide mission going on that road, going to that road as we speak. You know, so it's not just alone. Lokoja Abuja Road is also very dangerous. Everywhere is in crisis. Everywhere is, you know, fear has taken the order of the day. But what we can do in the circumstances is just to charge them to be much more responsive, to be much more up and doing, because they are also Nigerians. They also have lives. They also have families. They want to live as happily as we also want to live. We shouldn't probably outcast them. You know, but again, overall, you know, our leaders, not just security leaders at the level of security agencies, our political leaders, you know, our public service leaders, our civil service leaders, you know, need to be much more conscientious. And I think I agree with you with the use of that word, Leila. You know, so it's about commitment. If there's commitment, if there's the will, there surely will be the way. That's the charge I think we need to continue to give them, without necessarily going into details about equipment, about funds, and some other things, really. We can do a lot if there's a high level of determination as against you know, a weak service, you know, as against a reluctant disposition to executing your or to carrying out your assignments, Leila.
Thank you, Dr. Adeniyi. We're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back with you. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, Diaspora and Strategic Communications Scholar and Senior Lecturer in Mass Communication at Bayes University, Abuja. Dr. Adeniyi, what are your thoughts on, well, the apparent signs that the 9th National Assembly and the presidency are going to manage to bring the budget, with the news that the president is to present the budget next week? We're having some problems with the audio in our Abuja studio, so we're just going to wait for them to resolve that.
I can hear you very clearly.
Oh, you can hear us. You're back.
I can hear you very clearly.
Did you hear my question, Dr. Adeniyi?
I can hear you.
Okay. I asked you.
I had your question very clearly, and I was saying that, yes, and I was saying that your question is really very topical, you know, because it borders on our budget cycle, you know. And I've had the senior president say severally that he's committed to revising, to remedying the undesirable budget cycle, which is all right, you know. We are not saying that we should stick to the January, December calendar year. It's not about sticking to the Gregorian calendar, but it's just about also making it very predictable. Many countries in the world don't stick to January to December, for instance. United States, you know, is October to September. South Africa here is March to April. You know, it's not about sticking to the Gregorian calendar, but it's about us being definitive. What time of the year do we want? We need to stick to it, because and if we don't stick to it, we create problem for planning. Economics is about planning. Economics is already an affair, an idea that is bordered by shifting variables, and we do not have to deliberately compound it by having our cycle, by compounding, creating problem for our budget cycle. So it is salutary, it is good that the executive and the legislature are coming on the same page to remedy this problem. But if the budget is presented on Tuesday, the ball will be back in the courts of the National Assembly to work over 2 months to make sure that, like the Senate President said, they're able to pass it before Christmas or before the end of the year. So it's a test that they have set for themselves, and we can only wish them well in their attempt to pass this test, Tutu.
Well, Dr. Adeniyi, let me take you back to October 1, the Independence Day broadcast by the president, and his emphasis particularly on security, the economy, focusing on economic growth, and also fighting corruption and restoring, to use his phrase, good governance. What do you make of that speech? and what are your expectations going forward?
Well, like I've had all kinds of comments around this speech, but for me, I would just want to look at it from the point of view of what we expect of every conscientious leader. The role of the leader is to build a brand and galvanize the populace, the followers, to follow that brand, to follow that ideology, that vision and mission as partly encapsulated in that speech. At the level of trying to arouse our passion, to try to renew our aspirations, and probably encourage us and to let us know that they are still focused towards the delivery of the goods they promise us in dealing with insecurity, in improving on our economy, and in curbing corruption. I think it's okay for them to stick to the message, which is also good for strategic communication. But what happens with implementation? Is it just going to be about rhetoric? I think we need to see more action. We need to see more attempts, more conscientious attempts at delivering on these promises. It's okay to say that you may not fault the president at some levels, maybe in personal examples, personal lifestyle, you may salute him. What about some of his aides, some of his lieutenants that critics have been pointing accusing fingers at? How has the president been able to respond to these observations? I think we need more of that so that we just believe that the president, so we can see a picture of the president not just being the oasis, of integrity, as the case may be, of oasis of goodness. It shouldn't just be an oasis. We need more people around him to tow his part so that we can say, okay, we are all on the same page at the level of value reorientation, at the level of virtue, and commitment to a certain mission and vision, like the president tried to extrapolate in the speech. Doctor.
Absolutely. Now, on to some very good news that we have in the papers today. Revenue generation has increased, according to the Federal Inland Revenue Service, or the chairman, rather, Babatunde Fowler, from about 802 billion naira to 1.6 trillion naira. Now, of course, this is in their efforts to increase the tax base across the country. So it seems as though things are going pretty well for the FIRS. Now, of course, we also have a situation where VAT is coming into the talks, an increase in VAT coming in next year. So I'd like to know whether you think this is going to help or hinder their efforts that are currently going in a good direction when it comes to the revenue generation from taxes across the country.
Yeah, that's good news to see that there's an increase in revenue or increase in delivery, in submission from the FIRS. Good news. That's the kind of thing we want, really. Perhaps if we're having enough from there and if it's judiciously used, we'll be looking less at increasing our foreign debt. We'll be looking less at increasing our external debt, which is ordinarily choking us at the level of interest already, let alone dealing with the principal. But again, I will come back to what I keep saying, that how are we going to manage it? Is it going to be victimized by corruption, by prebendal acquisition, and by self-aggrandizement? Have we perfected ways? Have we dealt with our system that has made it so porous, so weak for infractions to happen? The problem with our system is that they are rather weak, as it were, such that, checks and balances, financial checks and balances are limited, and people are easily able to circumvent those processes, and pilfer the national purse. How well are we doing well in this regard? We have had the president making several statements in this to deal with anti-corruption, and we have seen efforts, really. But the argument here is that those efforts are not enough. We need to continue to be up and doing so that the more money that we are generating, the monies that we are reportedly generating can be well channeled towards a proper development issues. It's not enough to say that, okay, we are generating more revenue. It's also okay for us to be concerned about how well we use it. And other than that, too, if we are generating more revenue through FIRS, as it were, other than it also helping us to forget about external debt, perhaps it could also permit us to think away from introducing Tollgates, which was a problem when we had it, and which is going to stress the populace, the motorists, further, because they're already having to deal with bad roads and all of that, Leila.
Dr. Adeniyi, thank you. As we're rounding up, I'd like your take on a topical international news story, the impeachment attempt against President Donald Trump. He has been increasingly incandescent and has actually now stood in front of the world's press asking that China, not just Ukraine, look into Joe Biden and his son. What are your thoughts on whether it will be successful? Will it fail? What are your thoughts on how it could affect Joe Biden's candidacy as well?
Well, that's an interesting development to do, and it's a delight to watch it, but it's something that we know that will eventually happen, because we know the great President Trump is a tempestuous person, very unpredictable. He's somebody that acts without, like he says, he doesn't want to be politically correct. He just wants to be correct, or so to say. I don't know how he puts it, but we know that it's something that will come. And he has acted in the last 2 or 3 years like the proverbial cat with 9 lives. So many investigations have been held around him. So many scandals have come around him. He's sacked so many of his aides left, right, and center, but he keeps surviving. He keeps going. We know at a point he will put his hand will land somewhere and is going to trap him. That's where he seems to be at the moment. But again, Trump is an unpredictable person. Somehow he has a way of surviving, of riding against tides, and coming out surviving, not necessarily clean, but he'll just come out strong. I see this as happening. I don't think that the impeachment will pull through. Even if it pull through at the House of Representatives, I don't think the Senate will be on the same side with the House of Reps. But it's okay for us to stimulate, for them to stimulate international politics, U.S. politics particularly, the way it is going. But again, overall, will it help Joe Biden? Well, I do not very sincerely see Trump losing a second term in the U.S. Of course, we all know how he won in the first instance, riding against all expectations, against all polls. He's that kind of man that something just keeps him going, and I see it happening again, Tutu.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi. That's all we'll be able to take, and we want to thank you especially for helping us focus on quite a number of topical issues.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Yes.